بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. Continue lectures about embryology, growth and development course, and this lecture regarding the second week of development and formation of bilaminar germ disc. The objectives of this lecture are to describe the differentiation of hypoplast and epiplast, describe the development of amniotic cavity and primary yolk sac, describe the formation of bilaminar embryonic disc, and describe the appearance of extraembryonic mesoderm. Also describe the development of extraembryonic coelom or chorionic cavity, and describe the formation of secondary yolk sac. Also to identify subdivisions of extraembryonic mesoderm, and describe the appearance of body stalk and precordial plate, and finally to describe the chorionic villi and imperiotrough. So starting day by day, starting from the 7th day of development. At the 7th day, a small cavity appeared between the trophoblast and inner cell mass or epiplast. As we mentioned before, regarding the blastocyst, we have outer cell layer, it's called trophoblast, and inner cell mass, it's called epiplast. The epiplast form a single layer of cells that line the amnion, and this is called amnioplast cells. And the amnioplast cells secrete the amniotic fluid, and the amniotic cavity roofed by amnion and floored by the epiplast. And this figure show here the blastocyst, and here endometrium, and here the onset of implantation. We can see here in this figure also the blastocyst, and here we have the epiplast and amniotic cavity, and here we have the hypoplast, and here extra embryonic or exocoelomic membrane here, and here we can find or see small layers that form the amnioplast. Also here the syncytial trophoblast, the cytotrophoblast. The bilaminar disc or bilaminar embryonic disc is a circular area that contact the both amniotic cavity and primary yolk sac. And here we have the amniotic cavity, and here we have the primary yolk sac. And this is the embryonic or bilaminar embryonic disc. You can see also here, this is the embryonic disc or bilaminar embryonic disc, and here we have amniotic cavity, and here we have the yolk sac. The amniotic cavity lined by amnioplast here, and the yolk sac lined by Husser's membrane. And here we have the precordial plate, and here we have the primitive strip. So at day 8, the blastocyst partially embedded in the endometrial stroma, and the trophoblast differentiated into two layers. The first one is called cytotrophoblast. It's called cytotrophoblast and formed by cells with single nucleus. We call it mononucleated cells. And the outer cell layer is called syncytial trophoblast. It's called syncytial trophoblast, and it has a special figure which it has a multinucleated appearance, and which is contact directly with endometrial cells. So the embryoblast also differentiated into two layers, hypoblast and epiblast. The hypoblast, the layer of small cuboidal cells that adjacent the blastocyst cavity, and the epiblast are the higher or high columnar cells adjacent to the amniotic cavity. So near the yolk sac we have the hypoblast, and near the amniotic cavity we have the epiblast. Continue with day 8. A small cavity appears within the epiblast that become later the amniotic cavity, and the epiblast cells adjacent to the cytotrophoblast are called amnioblast, which line the amniotic cavity. Together with the rest of epiblast, they line the amniotic cavity. So the epiblast with the amnioblast line the amniotic cavity. As we see here in this figure, the endometrium, the triangle gland, and here we have the blastocyst, this is the hypoblast, this is the epiblast, this is the yolk sac or primary yolk sac, and here we have the amniotic cavity. Here we have the amnioblast, and here we have the cytotrophoblast, and here this is the syncytial trophoblast. This is the endometrial stroma. At day 9, the blastocyst more deeply embedded in the endometrium, and its penetrate also penetration defect in the surface of the epithelium where the blastocyst enter the endometrium. It's closed by fibrin coagulum. Also, vacuoles appear in the syncytium or syncytial trophoblastic cells. So these vacuoles fuse together to form a large lacunae. It started with small vacuoles or spaces between syncytial trophoblast. These vacuoles fuse together to form a large lacunae, and this is called a lacunar state. Early formation or early event for formation of placenta. Also in day 9, a thin membrane, it's called exocoelomic membrane or Husser's membrane, originated from the hypoblast that line the primary yolk sac. This membrane with the hypoblast form the lining of exocoelomic cavity or primitive yolk sac. So here we have two membranes that line the two cavities, the yolk sac and the amniotic cavity. The amniotic cavity lined by amnioblast and epiblast, while the primitive or primary yolk sac it's lined by the Husser's membrane and hypoblast. In this figure, show here we have the syncytium with the lacunae, the syncytial trophoblastic layer. Here we have the cytotrophoblast layer. Here we have the embryonic disc with epiblast and hypoblast. This is the amniotic cavity, and this is the primitive or primary yolk sac, lined by Husser's membrane or exocoelomic membrane and the hypoplastic cells, while the amniotic cavity lined by amnioblast here and the epiblast there. Regarding days 11 to 12, the blastocyst completely embedded in the endometrium, and also we can notice the lacunar spaces in the syncytial trophoblastic layer, while these cells of syncytial trophoblast penetrate deep in the stroma and erode the endothelial lining, the maternal capillaries or maternal sinusoid. So the lacunae become continuous with the sinusoid of maternal blood, and the maternal blood enters the lacunar system, thus establishment of uteroplacental circulation. Also, new cells appear between the inner surface of cytotrophoblast and outer surface of exocoelomic membrane. This is called extraembryonic mesoderm. Here, in this figure, we can see the sinuses or sinusoid of the uterus eroded by syncytium and become continuous with the lacunae. With the lacunae here filled with maternal blood. Here is in green, dark green color, the syncytial trophoblast, a light green, this is a cytotrophoblast, and here we have exocoelomic membrane or Hosser's membrane, and here we have the hypoblast, epiblast, and amnioblast over there. By the day 12 or 11 to 12, we can see here extraembryonic coelom, and also we can find extraembryonic somatopluric mesoderm right there. And here, this is a primitive yolk sac, and here is a site where the blastocysts enter the endometrium. Also, between day 12 and 11, a large cavity developed in the extraembryonic mesoderm, forming a new space called extraembryonic coelom, as we see in the last figure, and this called also chorionic cavity. And the extraembryonic mesoderm lining the cytoplasm and amnion that called extraembryonic somatopluric mesoderm. So the lining of the covering of yolk sac now is known as extraembryonic splanchopluric mesoderm, which formerly called Hosser's membrane. You have to pay attention here, and this lead to other organs and structures development in future. And this figure showing here the extraembryonic coelom expanded, and here is exocoelomic cyst, and there is formation of secondary yolk sac after formation of extraembryonic coelom. And here the embryo connected with connecting stalk with epiblast and hypoblast, and so we have here three cavities: amniotic cavity, secondary yolk sac, and chorionic cavity with a small cyst called exocoelomic cyst. Also, we can see here the cytotrophoblast and syncytial trophoblast with lacunae filled with maternal blood from uterine sinusoid. So we have here later on the opposite side to the connective stalk, buccopharyngeal membrane formation, an event for head direction area. Also formation of primary villi from a core of cytotrophoblast and periphery syncytial trophoblastic cells. In day 13, the surface defect of endometrium totally healed, and the trophoblast characteristic by a villous structure, which is called primary villi. The cells of trophoblast proliferate locally and penetrate into syncytium. That penetration forms these villi, which is called primary villi. Also, the hypoblast produce additional cells that migrate along sides of exocoelomic membrane, forming new cavity. And this cavity now called the definitive yolk sac. Okay. Again, return back to last figure. Here, we have the chorionic cavity, amniotic cavity, secondary yolk sac, and here exocoelomic cyst. And as I mentioned, these cytotrophoblastic cells form villi projected into the syncytium or syncytial trophoblastic cells to form an event with formation of primary villi. Also in day 13, during formation of yolk sac, large portion of exocoelomic cavity pinned off. A little portion appear as exocoelomic cyst, as we see in the last figure. The extraembryonic coelom expand and form the chorionic cavity, and the extraembryonic mesoderm lining inside the cytoplasm, and then known as chorionic plate, while the connecting stalk is still connecting the embryo to the surrounding cytoplasm, and later on becomes the umbilical cord. You can see here the formation of primary villi as a projection of cytoplastic cells in the syncytium, and is formed in cross section with outer of syncytoplastic cells and core of cytoplastic cell. In summary, I'm going to make a brief summary in dual language, Arabic and English, facilitate understanding this lecture, starting with this figure. هي عندنا this is a bilaminar embryonic disc، هو بيتكون لنا من الهايبوبلاست باللون الأصفر هنا، والإيبيبلاست باللون الأزرق. columnar cells epiblast, cuboidal small cells hypoblast. Also we have two cavities، عندنا two cavities، amniotic cavity و primitive or primary yolk sac. Amniotic cavity lined by two types of cells of epiblast and amnioblast. الامنيوبلاست اللي هي extending from the epiblast and lining the amniotic cavity. Also here we have exocoelomic membrane or Hossa's membrane which originated from the hypoblast. So اللي هي عندنا primitive or primary yolk sac lined by two cell types, hypoblast here and Hossa's membrane over there. So عندنا هنا amniotic cavity floored by epiblast، يعني عندنا الفلور بتاع الامنيوتيك كافيتي بيتكون لنا بالايبيبلاست والروف بالامنيوبلاست. عكسهم تماما هنا البرايمري او البريميتيف يولك ساك، الروف بيكون بالهايبوبلاست والفلور بيكون بشنو؟ بالاكسوسيلوميك ممبرين او الهاسس ممبرين. الكلام ده حوالي اليوم السابع وبداية اليوم الثامن. بعد ذاك بيبدأ يظهر لنا البريميتيف او البرايمري ميزوديرم، يظهر لنا between شنو؟ between the two layers of cytotrophoblast والهوسس ممبرين، ويبدأ يكون لنا later on cavity زي ما هنشوف بعد شوية. في نفس الوقت السنسيشن تروفوبلاست بتكون فيها فراغات او سبيسز نسميها فاكيولز. الفاكيولز دي بتتجمع او الفاكيولز بتتجمع بتدينا لاكيوني، واللاكيوني later on السنسيشن بيعمل invading بيغزو لنا شنو؟ الساينوسويد اوف اندوميتريوم، فبالتالي هيحصل شنو؟ هتتملي كل اللاكيوني ديل بشنو؟ بالماتيرنال بلاد. هو ده اول ايفنت لتكوين البلاسينتا، لتكوين اليوترو بلاسينتال سيركليشن. طيب نشوف هنا الاكسو او الاكسترا امبريونيك سيلوم اللي هو بتتكون هنا عندنا كليفت او سبيسز بتتكون في الاكسترا امبريونيك سيلوم، بعدين كلها بتتجمع عشان تسوي لنا الكوريونيك كافيتي. هنا عندنا الامبريونيك ديسك، امنيوتيك كافيتي، وال بريميتيف يوك ساك. هنا السايتوتروفوبلاست، وهنا عندنا السنسيشو تروفوبلاست. طيب هنا دي بداية تكوين الكوريونيك كافيتي، اللي هو بيحصل ريجريشن لشنو؟ لليوك ساك، اللي هو later on مع تكوين الكوريون هيتكون لنا secondary يوك ساك. والثري layers دي اللي هو اللايننج اوف كوريون بالاضافه للسنسيشن تروفوبلاست والساك تروفوبلاست بيعمل لنا الكوريون. هنا عندنا الاندوميتريوم، هنا عندنا اللاكوني filled with maternal blood. طيب هنا الكوريونيك ساك اتكون، والامبريو نفسه بيكون معلق بشنو؟ بستاك بنسميها connecting ستاك، بيكون معلق مع شنو؟ مع الكوريون داخل الكوريونيك كافيتي. فبالتالي يكون عندنا 3 main cavities: chorionic cavity، و secondary or definitive yolk sac، و amniotic cavity. الجزء الباقي من اليوك ساك بيظهر لنا as a cyst، اللي هو ده remnant of primary yolk sac، دي بقايا البرايمري او primitive yolk sac، بنسميها extra coelomic cyst or extraembryonic cyst. نلاحظ برضو في الجزء المعاكس للستاك او الكونكتيف ستاك، هنا بتكون لها البروكوردال بليت as an event of direction of head part، اللي هو later on بيعمل لها الباكو pharyngeal membrane او الاوروفارنجيال membrane. برضو في الديفلوبمنت بالنسبة للأسبوع الثاني ظهر لنا البرايمري فيلاي. برايمري فيلاي عبارة عن اكستنشن بتاعت السايتوتروفوبلاست داخل السنسيشن تروفوبلاست، اللي هي المنطقة دي لو نعمل لها كروس سكشن تظهر بالشكل ده. الفيلس لما نعمل لها كروس سكشن بتظهر بالشكل ده. الكورة والسنتر هنا عندنا دي سايتوتروفوبلاست محاطة بشنو؟ محاطة بسنسيشن تروفوبلاست. الكلام ده كله لحد نهاية الأسبوع الثاني. لاحظ هنا خلاص تم تكوين الكوريونيك كافيتي، والامبيريو معلق بالكونكتنج ستاك، وهنا عندنا البرايمري فيلاي تحولت لسكندري فيلاي. كيف تحولت سكندري فيلاي؟ كان عندنا كور اوف سايتوتروفوبلاست. السايتوتروفوبلاست بيحصل له انفادنج بشنو؟ بالميزنكايم، هو جاي من اتجاه شنو؟ الاكسترا امبيرونيك سيلوم او اكسترا امبيرونيك ميزوديرم. ظهور الاكسترا امبيرونيك ميزوديرم او الميزنكايم الكور بيحول لنا البرايمري فيلس لسكندري فيلس. السكندري فيلس ذاتها نفسها later on اول ما تبدا تظهر فيها blood vessels او blood capillaries تتحول لتيرشري فيلس. معناها عندنا 3 types of villi: primary، secondary، وتيرشري. ده بالنسبه للفيلس. بالنسبه للامبيريو بدا يتكون لنا السيستمز والاحشاء المختلفه، اللي هو في بدايه الاسبوع التالي. نفس الشيء بنلاحظ انه في بلاد فيزلز بدات تظهر لنا في شنو؟ في الكوريون، والفيلاي بدات شنو؟ تتحول لتيرشري. فبالتالي هنا بقت شنو؟ بلاسينتا فانكشنينج، والكونكتنج ستار تدخل فيها البلاد فيزلز تتحول لها لشنو؟ لامبلايكال كورد. الكلام ده حنشوفه ليتر اون في المحاضرات الجايه. Okay, for any questions drop any question if there regarding this lecture. I'm going to answer you just via Telegram. Drop or write or send your questions. I'm going to answer you for any questions or any points need clarification. Thank you and good luck.